So athletics started for me really at about the age of 4 or 5, and I had a cousin. She was a cheerleader and a gymnast, and she was doing a lot of flexibility work, and she was tumbling. And the first thing I did was try to just do what she was doing. Now, she was about 12, 13. She was doing back handsprings and she was able to do splits. So from then on, I already had a lot of flexibility. I was almost like a preliminary gymnast. I never did formal gymnastics, but I established this level of body control and awareness to where I can run, jump, and make my body move the way my mind wanted it to. So that was my foundation, was gymnastics. And then I got into wrestling. I could talk a little bit about football and playing Pop Warner, but it was wrestling where I was able to compete at a young age, one-on-one, and that's where I was able to let out all this built-up energy and aggression, and so that developed a lot of toughness for me. Gymnastics and wrestling, which aren't two commonly paired sports, it was allowing me to develop the movement in the body control and the flexibility, and then the mental toughness and the competition aspect, being able to go one-on-one, and that element of wins and losses is totally on you. What I find funny is that from a really young age, I was so competitive. I won my first 25 matches. So when I lost for the first time, I was flustered, and I used to pin every single person that I went against. So the first time I get down by points, I start looking at the score, and I'd get so caught up in shit, I'm down, and start playing the scoreboard that I would lose track of my actual opponent, and I'd just get beat. I lost like my next 5 of 10 matches, and from there I just fell out of it with the sport. Like, I'm exclusively gonna play football. But gymnastics and wrestling were the two main sports for me. And that leads to a bigger topic, as you asked, athletic development, because I think that those are the two most important things a kid could develop at a young age, and that's body control and awareness along with flexibility, because that sets the foundation for their movement patterns, and then some sort of combative sport or any element of like martial arts or wrestling. I would say that because I did those two sports at a young age, that really set the stage to then transition into football and basketball.
Gotcha. That's very interesting take. I never realized you were much of a wrestling and gymnastics person in the first place, though. That's interesting to know. I can't even imagine you in one of those wrestling suits or gymnastic suits. That's what I'm getting at. But my second question for you is, what does it take to become an athlete?
So I think an athlete can be defined as two different things. One is possessing natural athleticism, which I define as like fast twitch muscle fibers. And that's the ability to react very quickly, lateral quickness, just naturally being really fast and really strong, having a lot of power, which is the ability to transfer your strength really quickly into doing an activity, like throwing a ball fast or doing a power clean in weightlifting. And an athlete, you can be a natural athlete in which you just are able to watch a task be executed and then you can replicate it very quickly. However, it's also something that can be developed, and it can be developed through repetition. And so one thing that people often talk about is being a multi-sport athlete. And so when you're younger, if you play a lot of different sports, your body is getting used to a number of different movement patterns. You're developing hand-eye coordination and hand-feet coordination, and that's allowing you to just get comfortable moving in all different ways at rapid speeds. And so an athlete can be more of a mental thing. However, it does involve an activity or task. It can also be defined as being able to do things at an exceptional level. And what I find is that really natural athletes aren't as fundamentally sound. But utilizing your body to execute a task, I would say, defines someone as an athlete. And that does not discriminate against age. You can be 95 years old and still be an athlete.
Gotcha. Obviously, athleticism sounds like you have to have it from the ground up.
You say from the ground up?
From the ground up.
That's 100% true, man. Because everything starts with how your feet strike the ground and your ability to generate force off the ground. Everything starts from the ground up. And the lighter I am on my feet, the more fluid my walking pattern is, the faster I'm able to run and control my body, everything else will begin to transform. Even an upper body movement or shooting a basketball starts with how my feet are placed on the ground, and then that energy transfers up.
Exactly.
Nice point there, man. I'm impressed.
And my next question to you is, what's your approach to training young athletes?
Great question. In training young athletes, there's a couple things I look for before we even begin training. And it's what their walking pattern is, if their shoulders are back, if they're walking with confidence, and what sports have they played thus far in their life. I also want to see their parents, how their parents are built, and what their parents' approach is towards their development. Are they pressuring them? Do they want them to go pro? Are athletics an outlet for them? Or is the parent simply busy and trying to find a way to get rid of their kid? Those are a couple of things that I'm evaluating. And then figuring out how much that kid enjoys what it is that they're doing. But really starting from a movement standpoint is how they walk. Are they duck-footed? Are they pigeon-toed? Do their knees have what we call like a valgus knees, where their knees are caved inside? Really just how they're standing as a whole. So I'm seeing if they already have some sort of deficiencies. It's not good if a young kid is not moving very much, because if they live a sedentary lifestyle, there's a high likelihood in which those habits are going to follow them later on in life. And then most importantly, where their weight is at relative to their size and what sports they play. So if I'm working with a young kid and he tells me that he's a wide receiver, defensive back, or basketball player, he's a little overweight, I find that to be a little bit of a red flag, just because it tells me that they're not moving around enough or they're not getting fed the right food. But moving from there, what I try to establish is how well do they follow directions, because if they can pick up on cues very quickly, we can progress to more advanced movements. And then what their ability is to execute a task. How are they shuffling? Are their knees in alignment? Are their shoulders back? Do they have a lot of knee bend? Can they do a push-up? Can they do a plank? Do they have a baseline level of body control and strength and the ability to follow directions, so that I know that if I give them something, they can attempt to do it, and there's a foundation there so that we can build upon that base.
You brought up an interesting point back there about like how when you want to train a young athlete, you want to take a look at their parents first, and that's a good point to make, because most of the time, if you're looking at their parents and they're both like less than 5 feet tall, of course the kid is never going to make it in the basketball leagues.
Unless the mom was messing with the mailman.
Maybe.
That does happen, man. You'd be surprised. 2 5-feet parents, then the kid turns out to be a 6'5" giant. You're like, all right, something's off here.
Anyway, so you don't hear this a lot, but is it better to be a multi-sport athlete or a specialist?
Yeah, that's a great question. Being a multi-sport athlete obviously exposes you to a myriad of different movements and will allow you to understand your body a lot more. I know for me, in playing football, being a defensive back, backpedaling, changing direction, being able to move laterally and mirror my opponent made it really easy to play defense in basketball, get a lot of steals, and then get out on a fast break and just sprint. I had no formal basketball training, but I was still young enough to the point where I had this baseline level of athleticism playing football, and it was easy to transfer over. There are some sports like soccer, football, basketball, where that athleticism will translate. And also track and field is another one where, again, if you run fast, you jump high, you'll probably find some event in track that'll be very beneficial. Now, a sport like baseball or tennis or golf, these are very those are very task-specific sports in which you got to do the same repetitive movement, and you have to do them well to excel in the sport. And so you can play other sports if you're on a path to trying to go pro, or use that sport as a ticket to get to the next level. However, at some point you're going to have to go all in on that sport, because there are other people that are competing and they are putting all their time into it. So really, if you're just a one-trick pony from a young age, you might burn out or get sick of that sport, but you can't do anything else outside of that sport, and that might impact your overall physical fitness. So it's be as versatile as possible from ages 6 to about 16 going into your junior year. And you might even be a kid that plays baseball or basketball or football and is, I'm going pro in this sport, or at least you think you are. But it's good to try out other sports, and then right when you get to your junior year, okay, let me hone in on now the recruiting process. Let me see where I really stack up and put all my eggs in one basket. Now what you might find is that if you're really good at the other sports, we might be at like an all-state level, or maybe you could play 2 sports in college, and you have a lot of people that have been developing you, and friends and family members that you've almost grown into that sport in that process with them, then I think you should try to play as many sports as possible as long as you can. And that's because you can and you have the ability to do. I would say it's a case-by-case basis in regards to should I specialize or not. However, the more sports you can play, I'm talking about the age of 15 or 16, is going to ultimately define your physical fitness levels throughout the rest of your life. So in that case, more is better, but as you get older, it's time to lock in on what it is that you want to do.
I think you hit the nail on the head on that one. Usually, you never see Michael Jordan being good at basketball, but also excel in football. Let's take badminton and tennis with me, for example. I really like badminton. I don't like tennis, but for some reason, both of the sports seems familiar. Of course, I'm gonna excel in both of them, but you take badminton and golf, and those 2 sports are completely different. Of course, if I suck at golf and then there's a spot for me in the badminton national leagues, then of course I would take badminton. So even if I like golf over badminton.
For sure. And some athletes have this problem where they might like one sport more, but they're better at the other sport. They're going to ride it till the wheels fall off. I think that ultimately you should definitely commit your time to what you're passionate about, but being rational about where the sport is going to take you and be able to draw that line in the sand. Now, you brought up an interesting point discussing 2 sport athletes and excelling at a really high level. And it's funny that you referenced Michael Jordan, because he left basketball in the middle of his career to play baseball. And a lot of people wondered like why, and they say he was horrible. He was such a good enough athlete to the point where he could dedicate his time to at least get to the minor league level and compete a little bit. And so people always harp on him saying he was a terrible baseball player, but he actually competed and had some success in the minor leagues. That's most people's dream. And so I think that's a testament to the fact that if you take a natural level of athleticism and you dedicate your time and your focus, it can definitely translate. What I find fascinating though is a Deion Sanders, who's obviously an NFL Hall of Famer doing amazing things at Jackson State as a coach. This guy played Major League Baseball simultaneously for 15 years. And so he was able to not just take his fielding skills, which translate very well to football, and his natural athleticism, but he was actually a pretty decent hitter. I believe he hit 20 to 30 some home runs. And so it wasn't like he was developing strength and power in the offseason. He was just playing football. He was playing football and baseball all the time. He wasn't doing focused training. He was just playing the sports. And I find that to be fascinating. That's elite athleticism to where the sports translate. And this guy has the temperament, the discipline, and just the raw ability to do both. But one thing I find interesting is, and I think this is the thing that stops most athletes from playing multiple sports, because you look at some of the best athletes in the world and they can obviously translate that athleticism to other endeavors, and I think it's the mental component of what that sport demands. Like in baseball, you got to handle a lot of failure, striking out. In football, if you're the quarterback, you deal with a lot of stress, whereas in basketball, it's a team sport. You can miss shots, but you can carve out a unique role. So you're not simulating that failure as much. It's not as mental. Also in basketball, you're not really getting hit. So you might be an elite basketball player and you would think, this guy runs fast, he jumps through the gym, he has good body control, good hand-eye coordination, but he can't play wide receiver because he's afraid of getting hit. which is an interesting translation with sport. But what you also see is guys who play the power forward position who are between that 6'4" to 6'7" body type. Well, no, power forwards are a little taller, but that 6'4" to 6'7" body type transition over into football, and they happen to be very effective wide receivers and tight ends. So it's interesting how certain sports have certain positions where if you do this, it may transition very well into another sport. But the concept of a multi-sport athlete being able to do a number of different things, I find that to be so fascinating when you look at athletic development across a large scope.
Yeah, you don't really find a lot of sports that cater towards your needs as well. If you're good at particularly one thing, then there has to be a sport out there that actually caters to what you're good at. And so you're a hitter, baseball, golf, tennis, badminton, all that sort of stuff. You're a runner, you like to run towards a goal, and that's pretty much track and field, football, soccer, basketball.
For a very long time, too, NFL general managers thought that they could take a 100-meter sprinter and make him a wide receiver. And again, this goes back to how physical is this guy? How well does he catch the ball? How well does he change direction? The wide receiver position in football is very nuanced, and there's an element of having awareness, having a high football IQ, to where you can't just be a good athlete and expect results. But a transition in sport that often happens is an athletic quarterback can go play the wide receiver position because they understand those nuances. They've been throwing to those guys. They understand how to maneuver your body to get open. And so now it's, okay, I know what this quarterback needs me to do. Let me go out here and execute it. And so that IQ can now transition on over to another position, which I find to be fascinating because a guy can play quarterback for 4 years of high school, 4 years of college, and then go play wide receiver in the NFL, having never played the position, and actually pick up on it really quickly. So things like that are possible, and that's where the mental component really comes in.
Gotcha. What do you look for when you're evaluating an athlete?
Their demeanor, first and foremost. I evaluate how an athlete carries himself. Is he humble, but also has this slight bit of arrogance in which he knows what he brings to the table, but he's not talking about it, which is small things like posture, how others perceive them, how they are around their teammates, do they have a positive attitude, how much do they like attention? All things before I even watch them move or play, which is really just, again, energy. It's something that you can just feel and understand. And they always say game recognizes game. And having been a former athlete myself that's still competing, I can just see the kids that have that it factor, which you can't quite quantify. But a big thing that is prevalent amongst athletes is, are they front chain dominant when they walk? And so it's where their weight is distributed. Are their feet more duck-footed, which means that they're putting a lot of stress on their quads and their hip flexors, and they're not using their posterior chain enough. And what you find is athletes that are more posterior chain dominant with strong glutes and hamstrings, where those are a lot more developed, is that their feet tend to be more inward, which is pigeon-toed. And when your feet are pigeon-toed, your ankle bones are a little higher, and that allows you to change direction with a lot more fluidity. In that movement, you have more refined movement patterns, and that limits your potential for injury. Limiting your potential for injury is a huge part of playing sport because you are sharp with your movements and you can be relied upon and knowing that you're not going to get hurt. Once you get hurt and you start getting soft tissue injuries, those compound over time. So once you get one, you're likely to get another one. It really begins with the alignment of your feet, which impact your walking gait. Okay, that's a huge element of what I'm always evaluating when I look at an athlete. But another thing being posture, and what you find is that if an athlete lifts weights from a young age or lifts weights too frequently, especially upper body, doing things like bench press or arms too much, they lose fluidity and then they become very rigid. They get stiff within their movement patterns. And again, you have larger muscles, and so they can't move through their full range of motion. And that's going to limit your ability to be effective when you do sport-specific tasks. Posture, the way your feet move, energy, and demeanor. Those are the three key things I look at when evaluating an athlete.
Does academic success and intelligence correlate with athletic ability?
I find that the greatest athletes in the world have a level of superior intelligence, and I think that comes to understanding movement patterns, having knowledge of their actual sport, and finding ways to win. And so that takes a high level of intelligence. Also, an ability to communicate and understand certain dynamics within the game. And these are things that are often embedded in their subconscious to where they know how to make the right play at the right time. Now, some athletes who are elite might not like school, but they're hyper competitive and they turn out to be very good entrepreneurs because they take that same drive and they're saying, okay, money is like winning. Let me just go chase that. However, that's for the elite. Let's break it down to the more micro level, like high school, college. And what I find is that an athlete that gets very good grades has a higher level of competence and ability to process directions. One thing that I do not like is when a kid is a little bit of an asshole in the classroom, so arrogant in which he can't focus his mind, is really focused on garnishing attention and the accolades. And so therefore they don't feel the demand to even try. Now, I'm not saying that every student needs to be an all-world student, but your grades are often a reflection of your work ethic and having an understanding of what's important to allow you to get to the next level and identifying what that next level is. So if I'm in high school and I understand that I want to go pro, I have to go to college in between. The only way I'm going to go to college is if I qualify academically. Are you aware of this? So if you can't get good enough grades to get into school or to keep yourself eligible, then that tells me that you don't care enough. So in a hypothetical case in which people pull strings for you, which a lot of elite athletes tend to be a little entitled, understand that judgment day is going to come because you're taking a lot of shortcuts, and so the truth will always rise to the surface. And now what are you going to do when perhaps your athletic ability diminishes or people are sick of your shit? You have now skipped out on developing this level of intelligence or understanding processes and actually finding the solution to problems, all just basic things that you learn in school. And so now, beyond this athletic sphere, you lack an identity and the basic level of intelligence to navigate in life after sport. And so academic success is one thing, but having a level of self-awareness to do what you need to do to put yourself in positions that you need to. And so I have no time for athletes that have no regard for how they're received and do not take the time to really empower themselves with knowledge.
What's the difference between having athleticism and being an athlete?
So we discussed this earlier a little bit. Athleticism I would define as being able to move quickly, having a lot of fast twitch muscle fibers, lateral quickness, being able to run really fast, being very strong. Now, how can you take these baseline level of physical traits and then transfer them to an actual sport? So in golf, there's not a high level of actual movement. However, there's a specific task. And so I would define getting your body to move within a certain pattern to execute a task as being an athlete in that specific sport. Whereas in track and field, your tasks are very movement oriented, where you don't have to necessarily learn a specific thing, although running is a skill. You might throw a shot put or you might jump, but you can naturally run fast and jump high and excel in those things. And that can be through just strength and conditioning and sprint training. When you start honing in on a craft, that is what I define as being an athlete. But a lot of people have athleticism naturally. How can you then allocate that?
For a young kid trying to go pro, what should they focus on?
For a young kid trying to go pro, I think the most important thing is being a historian of the sport and understanding currently what's going on. What are the trends in the sport? Are there athletes that have a similar body composition that play the same position as you? And what was their path to getting there? you have to understand what you're up against. Understand the playing field, okay? And then looking at who the best is in your region, who's made it from where you're from. What is the likelihood? What are you going to have to do to get exposure? You have to understand what you're up against and what you're going to have to do to actually get there. So it's goal setting. That being number one. But number two, what it really boils down to is movement. Okay, so for one, do I have a level of flexibility? Am I taking care of my body so that I am not getting hurt? How much do I have to weigh in order to meet the standard of what athletes in the professional level are for the position or the thing that I want to do? So I need to establish what those baselines are to start setting individual goals so that I can meet that criteria to be properly evaluated as a candidate to get to that level, and then ultimately mastering the sport that you play. And what I mean is the position or the specific task. So getting very specific training and doing that as frequently as possible. There's an element of repetition which you just can't cheat. And so making sure that you have a nice balance between the physical fitness and the conditioning element, but also the skill development component, and balancing those things out so that you don't overtrain and that you're fueling your body correctly and that you're getting the proper rest and recovery. What I find is that a lot of athletes train really hard for extended periods of time, but they're not doing the right things that actually translate to success in the sport. They're lifting weights too much, or they focus too much on speed. At the end of the day, you have to be effective at your sport to the point where you can actually impact the game. And if you do that at scale, people are gonna come find you. And what you have to do is simulate that and simulate the success and failures that the sport will present so that you're ready for game-specific scenarios so that when the lights are on, you show out. And when you show out, you get found and good shit tends to happen. Whether that be opportunities like getting a scholarship, going pro, or getting a marketing deal, which now high school and collegiate athletes are getting exposure to, where they can get paid for being exceptional at their sport at a very young age. So that's what I would define as the key things to focus on if you're a young athlete trying to get to the next level.